Hi, this is Carl, also known as Zarepath in the Custom Magic community, and I'm doing another video looking at the sets that are up for rotation for the next rotation of Custom Standard. This set is Descent from the Highlands by FifthDragon. This set has the returning mechanic of Evoke, which is a fun mechanic, and it also has the new mechanic of Bloodied, which we'll see shortly, and Glorious End, and perhaps some 4C, I think it's called. We'll get to that as we go down. This set, I think, is a small set. It doesn't have as many cards as a normal set, and it has a lot of really interesting individual cards. It kind of has a cube vibe, and I'll just kind of go through and just talk about them. So Children of the Clouds, I kind of skipped this first part and just saw this bottom part, creating X bird tokens, instant speed with flying, and you gain that much life. It's like, oh my gosh, that is crazy overpowered. I realized it has this condition, which makes it kind of hard to evaluate, makes it an interesting individual card. And I wondered if this was part of a cycle, and it is, except the cycle is not completely uniform across. It checks if you have a creature of the color of the spell, but in different numbers. Some of them you need to have 3 of those creatures, or 1, or 2, which makes it a little hard to just kind of mentally parse. And it's also hard to think about the set overall and what it is and what it brings and what it's doing without stronger joining themes or stronger, more clear patterns to the cycles. And that's just kind of an overall comment, but something you'll see as we go through these. However, it allows for these individual cards to get really spicy and really individually exciting. And each card kind of has to be evaluated on its own merits because it's hard to see how it relates to the set as a whole. But a lot of them are exciting in and of themselves, like this one here. You know, this sounds really exciting, but you need to have some creatures, or they need to have some non-white creatures. I like that it's not just what you have, but also potentially what they have, so you can control your ability to cast it. And if you lose that control, there's still a chance that you'll have the ability to. A nice little blinker. This is an interesting evoke spell that lets you reanimate a lot. In the last video of Attorney at Whiterun, one of the criticisms I had was that a lot of the designs seemed to be the same design, just kind of reiterated in different ways, whether it was, you know, both players drawing cards in a bunch of different ways or other things. The mechanic that does that, or the repeated design in this set, and I'm beginning to think that most designers have this, just kind of a pet design that they like doing over and over in their sets, is returning from the graveyard, because there's a lot of that in this set. Because it's very splashy and fun. Like, there's a reason that FifthDragon likes it. I like it also. But it probably used for some diversity of design. But this is a very interesting build around. Personally, I'd make it 2 or less. 'Cause 3 or less, like, you're just always going to evoke this. There's no reason not to. Well, I guess if you don't have the things in the yard, that would be a reason not to. But this would see play in Custard. I'm almost certain. Like, that's just a ton of value. Just a really great mid-range card. It's a token maker. This is kind of fun. It can be a 1/1 or, you know, 2/2. Elks. Elk tribal is a major thing in Descent. And this would definitely see a lot of play. It's very powerful for strike lifelink 3/3 for 3. And then when your creatures die, you get elf spirits with first strike and lifelink. And then there's definitely some elk tribal. There's a lot of pushed elk at the 3 and 4 spots. And ferocity works well with those. Maybe that's why it's 3 or less as opposed to 2 or less, because so many elk are 3. if this set were to rotate in, I'd be making an elk deck for sure, because a lot of the most pushed creatures in this set seem to be elk. This forces them to pick Stag of the Moon whenever they play anything. I don't know that I like that as a design, kind of forcing their options. This is kind of a fun thing. You either make them skip a combat step, or they can't cast certain kinds of spells. That would fit in that Turbo Fog deck we were talking about with a tournament at Whiterun. I really like this design, the Vitality of Blossoms. It's probably not as good as I would want it to be, but it's deliciously win more. And life gain is so appealing in a win more kind of way, and then also getting indestructible just feels, it's very appealing. I imagine it really sucks for the other person, but if you're wasting a lot of resources making sure your life total is higher than your starting life total, I think you kind of deserve some pretty hefty bonuses. Yeah, some more. I guess this doesn't come into play, but there's a lot of graveyard recursion. 4C, this is a mechanic that it's like Miracle, except it's like Forecast from Ravnica, except you can't do it over and over again each upkeep, so it's better than Forecast, because it's only when you draw it, so it's a one-time thing. And when you do that, you have all the information of what you can do during your turn, which you didn't with Forecast, because it was upkeep, I believe. And then you can choose whether to pay or not. I actually think 4C is a pretty interesting mechanic. I don't know if I necessarily like it on the designs in this set, but I would love to playtest it more and see what the most fun moments of it were. Something I realized, I'd seen the set symbol a lot before, but I didn't realize till now that it's literally an elk as the set symbol. This is a weird card. Ariam the Dreamer, 1/2 hexproof for 1. You know what decks like hexproofs for 1 mana? Boggles. I don't think this makes it to a Boggles deck, though. Well, I don't know what it does. It's just a very weird card, and like I mentioned, it feels very cubey. It has kind of a Sensei's Divining top spice to it, where you can constantly pay mana to put the cards on top of your library back in order, and at the beginning of your upkeep you got to put cards from your hand back in there, but then you can pay 3 to draw cards. It's a very strange card, and I don't know, people with more experience playing with top would probably have a better idea of how strong this is. I have a gut feeling that this is not healthy. It seems unhealthy, but perhaps this drawback here of having to put a card from your hand on top of your library is so huge that it doesn't get there except in very specific instances, at which point it's probably perfect, right? Although shuffling every turn, probably not fun. Aurora's Whisper is a very powerful card. It's a creature spell, counter creature spell, scry 2. That seems about right for a 3 mana counter spell. But for C, if when you draw it, you can pay a blue to return a creature to its owner's hand. I was thinking, wow, this is just absolutely nuts. But if you think about how you want your counter spells to be, this is very, very focused against creature spells. And it's interesting in that it bounces a creature back that you can then hold up a counter spell to counter it. I think that's a really interesting play pattern. Unfortunately, it kind of does something that is one of the mistakes I make as a designer a lot, which is making counter spells that are publicly broadcast. Like, I have a counter spell and I'm going to use it on something, and that makes the other player, it's a puzzle for them to solve, but it's a very frustrating, unfun puzzle, in my opinion. So I don't know that I like 4C on a counter spell, but if you're going to do it, I kind of like the pattern here of bouncing their creature and then having the counter spell to counter it if it were to come back in. Blood Price is the other mechanic, one of the other new mechanics that it makes sense. I enjoyed. You can pay less for a card by sacrificing a creature and paying the blood price. However, you get to draw 3 cards by paying 1 and a blue and sacrificing a creature, which seems probably too strong. An interesting thing, blood price is a great sacrifice outlet. But there's also lots of other designs that ask you to sacrifice things. I wonder if that's too redundant to maybe you want to keep blood price as your main sacrifice outlet. There's another counter spell for 1 mana, lets you counter a permanent spell, which is an interesting classification for a counter spell to hit. But I don't know. This is a kind of a set of hoops. There's a lot of hoops, like sacrificing a creature is a hoop. The cycle I was talking about, where you have to have 2 white creatures so you can make all the flying birds, that's a hoop. This spell also has an individual hoop of sacrificing a permanent to give your opponent a hoop of paying 4 mana. And I think cards like that are interesting because they they lead to different... I think there's a lot of potential strategy in those kinds of designs, in both your deck building and in making you value different things in a normal game of Magic differently than you normally otherwise would. This I like as a 4C design. It kind of helps you cycle through and find other 4C triggers. Like as you draw it, you can reveal it and pay, basically cast it for free, right? Well, you're not casting it for free. You get to cast it without using the card. And then maybe you hit another 4C trigger because you're able to scry first. I really like this as a 4C enabler. I don't know if it... In Custard, I don't... Well, scry 2, draw a card for 1 and a blue. That's actually quite good compared to Anticipate. Anticipate, you get to look at 3 and then pick, but this has other bonuses. I don't know. Selene the Cruel, this is another hoopy card. Whenever you cast a spell, you have to sacrifice a permanent and draw a card. There's a lot of drawbacks, so maybe this is just a very spiky set. Exiling cards from your graveyard to counter a spell, unless its controller pays 1. This is an onboard counter spell, but you have to fuel your yard first. But whenever you cast spells, you have to sacrifice a permanent, but then you also draw a card. So kind of difficult to evaluate on its own, but very interesting. I like this design of Silent Musing. Good for tempo decks to remove blockers, but also to protect your threats without losing card advantage. Okay, look at this hoop. This is very interesting. Only if you control 3 or more blue creatures. Blue generally isn't the color that wants to have lots of creatures, so this is an odd requirement. Or have 60 or more cards in your library. That seems like a line of text you'd only have on a blue card, but it is very strange. It's very... this is a fun hoop for me, because the effect is also weird. You can exile any number of cards from your library. I don't know why there's a scry 1 at the end. Why not, I guess. But I don't know. It's just very, very odd. A lot of these cards feel like there's a specific deck that just abuses the crap out of the design, and I just can't think of it when I look at the card. So the Johnny in me is excited by a lot of these cards, but the Melvin in me is in distress that I don't know what patterns of play that the set generally wants me to do. You have Blood Price, which wants you to sacrifice things, and Glorious End does have things that want to be sacrificed. That's a nice little combo. But most of the individual designs just seem to warp your strategy in very unique ways, which gives it kind of a QB feel, I think. Blood price. I wonder if this could see play in Custard. 3 mana, sacrifice a creature, 2/5 flash. You probably want to be doing something a bit stronger than that, but the numbers are almost there. This is a fun card. I like this. You can exile a card that doesn't share a type with the card already exiled by it, either from your hand or graveyard, to then draw a card. So it's a card advantage engine, but only as long as you are selective of the types that you're exiling. I could see this being very fun and interesting. It makes your draws more interesting. You're like, I just need an artifact, enchantment, or sorcery, you know? And then you can exile it to get something else, or self-milling, like, all right, you know, what am I going to mill from top of my deck so that I can draw a certain number of cards. I really like this design. I don't know what kind of decks it goes in, but a self-mill deck, I guess. But this would be one I'd try and build around, try and find a home for. This is also a really fun individual card. I kind of wish that it made your hand limit 13, because it feels bad, like, oh, I have fewer than 13 cards, oh, draw 6 cards, but then you have to discard a bunch at the end of your turn. Considering it costs 7 mana, I think increasing, well, yeah, it's probably okay. Okay, black. Blood price 0. 0. Free spells. Those are fun. Return up to 1 creature card from your graveyard to your hand. You can turn up to 2 non-human creature cards instead if a creature died under your control this turn. Okay, well, if a creature died under your control this turn, you probably paid the blood price, right? So what this is saying is if you can cast this for free by returning a creature from play to your hand, and then get something else from your graveyard. That seems compelling, but not necessarily broken. I guess the way you break it is you have tokens, and you self-mill into, like, really valuable good creatures. And you sacrifice your token, and you get 2 worthwhile creatures for free. You've basically drawn a card for free. And not only that, you've, you know, drawn 2 selective creatures. I like this design. It doesn't feel like common. I think some of the rarities are a little off in the set, but very interesting card, particularly with blood price and being able, it works with other blood price cards well. You can recur the things you're sacrificing. I think Bone Splinters is an odd inclusion because blood price is already here. It goes along with the mechanical theme and what the set is asking you to do, but I think you want your mechanics to be the ones asking the player to do it and not the other things. Glorious End. Okay. I think the end needs to be capitalized. I'm not sure the exact style, but I really like Glorious End as well. When this creature dies, if it was tapped, target player discards 2 cards. So it's not just asking for the creature to die. It's not a normal death trigger. It also has to be tapped when it dies, and that encourages you to use your creatures. It also makes blocking kind of interesting. It's like, well, you know, I can kill this creature or trade with it, but then he gets this death trigger that otherwise maybe he wouldn't get. It makes instant speed removal better because you can kill their creatures before they attack and become tapped. Yeah, you know, the more I think about the mechanics, I like Glorious End a lot. Evoke is always a good reprint. Times I've seen it, just a lot of interesting space, particularly for Johnny's, and I think Spikes as well, who love the different cost variations. And Blood Price, I enjoy. I think I really like these mechanics. And 4C, I see promise there. I think I just kind of wish they all came together in a more cohesive package, perhaps. That's kind of a vague criticism, and maybe I'll get more specific as we go. Yeah, so this one asks if you have a black creature or have 10 or less life. I'd also like this cycle of rare spells to maybe have a name that lets you know they're part of the cycle. I'd also like if they all had a flat number of creatures it asks you to have, if it's always 2 or 1. And then its secondary mode, according to the flavor of the spell or the color, I think could work. It is a nice way to have appealing spells like, wow, this effect for that cost, and then a player imagining, oh, I could do this easily. That just makes it more appealing. Diabolic Edict seems like a good inclusion for the set. That definitely be a custard card. A good 2-mana Edict removal to stop the unstoppable Boggles deck that is assuredly going to be in the format. This is an interesting push into mono black. I mean, this is just very strong. Even if you just cast it for 6, I think a lifelink cased 6/6 is very good. And if you have other demons, oh, would this go into Isemerge against aggro decks? If you're behind, you lose the sweeper from Perverse Tyrant or whatever it's called, Perverse Demon from villains that could sweep those creatures. But this would allow you to gain life. So if your Izalith finds this, yeah. Yeah, maybe that comes out of the board, or maybe it's a one of in the main for Isemerge. Or in a mono black deck that has sacrifice fodder. Or an Aristocrats. Probably not Aristocrats. Aristocrats right now really likes being in green for blight hatching or spawning, whatever it's called. And that's just quite the hefty cost there, which I think is fine. But it means it probably won't be in an Aristocrat style deck unless it's a mono black one. This is a very interesting aggro card to me. It feels very cubey. It's like a hate bear, right? But a hate bear in an aggressive way, which I guess is how hate bears are. Asking your opponents to have to pay life when they cast spells. I think this would be very strong, even if it just asks an additional 1 life. Maybe. But then maybe it's not as appealing. I don't know. I love that it doesn't deal damage to them. It just adds a cost to the opponent's spells. And so the opponents are doing it to themselves because of this card. This is one of my favorite cards going through the set before. This is another really weird Hoopy card. Rend. This lets you, it does 2 different things. The base mode, you just leech 1 from anything, instant speed. It's pretty good. It's okay. And then whenever you cast a black spell, you can pay 1, exile this from your graveyard, and then destroy a creature that was dealt damage this turn. So if you're casting multiple spells in a turn, this can just kill a creature for 2 mana, basically. Or, if you bin it, you can use it for value later. I don't know where that goes, but it's an interesting tool. Yeah, the Glorious End I really enjoy. A lot of the triggers are very unique. Like, they're not the most simple of triggers. They do various things, and often with lots of card advantage. So there's definitely a lot of big rewards on the other sides of these hoops. Sensible Inclusion. This card is dumb. I mean, you just get to look at their hand and cast anything you want from it, which is, I don't know. Like, it's card advantage because they're losing a card, you're losing a card, but you get to cast the card they lose, so you're up a card from this, and it's very disruptive to them. It's just, I don't know, it's way too transgressive in my opinion, and easy to do. This is kind of interesting. Maybe a little slow. I don't know. I compare it to Plague. I forget what it's called, but it's in one of the recent Ravnica sets. It's a 3/2 for 3. Whenever a creature dies, you lose a life and draw a card. This is a May, which is nice. Maybe this goes in Aristocrats deck. to give you some cards, which I don't think is something that's in the current Aristocrats suite. I don't think they have a lot of great card advantage opportunities, but that just may be the way they've been built. This walker cares about red mana. I like that it's mechanically themed. This would probably go well in a big red style of deck. I don't like that it can't really protect itself very well. It definitely requires supportive creatures, which probably makes it... I'd probably play Screecher over this, or Avatar the Volcano at 5. I kind of like this in a black-red deck. It might not be strong enough, but I like that you can get card advantage when it dies. I think it's a good design regardless. This is a fantastic removal, particularly for red-based control decks. So like blue-red control finally has an instant speed way to take something down and exile it, which would be really good. I know some people don't want too much exile removal in the format, so something to watch for there. Crimson Sunrise is one-sided land destruction and kills everything. Because if you're running this, you're only playing basics. Each player sacrifices 6 non-basic lands. Oh yeah, you can just run demons. Are there a lot of red demons in this set? It seems like an odd... Huh. Black-red basics, demons. Each player sacrifices. This makes me want to build around it, but only so that my opponent can have the least amount of fun as possible. I think the design is just going to feel really unfair when it gets cast. Oh, Renown is in the set also. It kind of is coming up later in the spoiler, so it seems as kind of a surprise. Renown is a popular custom mechanic for various reasons. The way it works is whenever a counter is put on them, not just when they become renowned. So you can have interesting synergies of other cards putting counters on them to trigger these abilities, which I think is interesting. I kind of like this design, actually. That might see play in a deck, perhaps. This is a 5/4 flying haste for 5, which I enjoy, and it deals 2 damage to each other creature you control. So mono red may not always enjoy casting this. Again, an interesting hoop. And this is the red version of that cycle, which unfortunately is not very good. It's a tutor, and then you have to discard a card. I think it's just trying too hard to be a red demonic tutor. There's just too many hoops and downsides. This is a fascinating card. This reminds me of the black demon that you could play the blood price and 4 black to cast it cheaper. I wonder if there's some slight monocolor themes here. This obviously wants to go in some kind of big mono red because it wipes everything else. That's something I appreciate from this set, is most sets make sure that they have like really good red aggressive creatures and some burn to complement them, because a lot of players know that mono red is always a deck, and it's generally cheaper than other competitive decks, and it's always good to just design tools for that. But here there seems to be a lot of tools for a bigger red deck, and I appreciate that. Give some texture to the color and construct it. You have to wait a turn for this to attack, and then you can just wipe everything else off the board and burn everybody, but also burns yourself. Magmatic Cache, I'm pretty confident is way too good. And giving red the ability to spend 1 mana to draw 3 cards and then discard a card, like you go up 2 cards, but it's better than that because you get to draw 3 cards and discard 1, which is a lot better. You do have to sacrifice a land, which I think is an appropriate cost for something in red, particularly if you're going to be getting card advantage. I want to see red sacrifice something really meaningful that's going to hurt them in the long term, and I think sacrificing a land fits that. But yeesh. There was a version of this in Villains where you could sacrifice land and just straight draw 2 cards. And that used to be just 1 red mana, and I think it was pushed to 2 just because red getting card advantage for 1 mana just still felt wrong. This also lets you activate your graveyard. Like, I don't know if this goes into Ismerge because you want to keep your lands for that. You need to hit your 3 and 4 drop, your land drops, but this helps you bin things. I suspect that this would be too busted in a various amount of decks. I don't think this is a tool that you want to have in a healthy environment. And this is where not having as clear of mechanical themes kind of hurts some designs, because it's hard to justify this card. Like, it's neat and interesting and unique to think about, but just being worried about how it might hurt a format, sometimes you can say, well, it's really, it works with this mechanic in this set, or it goes with this strategy I want players to be doing, and then you can see if it's worth testing and if it's worth tweaking the design. But here it's not so clear why you want to be sacrificing lands with the other mechanical themes of the set. This is another great big red card. It's 8 mana for 7/7 Flying Menace Haste. Okay, nice big Timmy card, and it costs 5 less if your opponent has 7 or more cards in hand, which makes you wonder, why would they have 7 or more cards in hand? This is very strange. I don't know. Yeah, just another odd hoop. And I kind of like that this set just has all of these very odd specific hoops. I suspect there's players that won't like that, though. Like, I can't speak for Timmy's generally, but Timmy, if you ignore this first line of text, and Timmy just sees this card, 8 mana, 7/7 Flying Menace Haste, they're probably on board. But the first thing they read is it costs this much less to cast if an opponent has 7 or more cards in hand. So then they start doing math. Okay, it costs 8, but then it'll cost 3, but only if they have 7 or more. Like, it's just a lot of different numbers. And then it's like, yeah, but then what if they don't have that? I think Timmy's like the all upside. And if they feel like they're missing out on part of the card's strength, it's not as exciting. I think Timmy's want the cards to have all of the advantages in play as much as possible. Maybe that's wrong, but that's my instinct on this. I don't know how often an opponent's going to have that many cards in their hand. Maybe that's a side effect of 4C. I don't know if the 4C designs just tend to fill up hands more or not. But it seems like an oddly specific hoop to have. This might see play, just being able to get rid of a couple things at instant speed. A cantrip. It's a slightly pushed red cantrip. I think generally they only do one or the other and not both. Like, this is something I would play in a specific deck. Some more Glorious End. I haven't found a Glorious End that I think sees play in Custard. Like, I don't think that this death ability is strong enough. I do notice that there are lots of other cards that care about counters being placed. So there's the renowned ones I noticed in Aura, and I do appreciate that this helps synergize with that. Whoa. Huh. I wonder if this sees play in a mono red deck, because it could potentially deal 3 damage now and 3 damage later, which would be 6 damage for 3 mana. It could deal 9, right? I think the haste is a little weird, but it's okay. I don't know, that's probably not good enough, but it might be. I mean, that could be. It'll deal 3 no matter what, maybe kill a blocker. This is a pretty solid body, 6/6 Vigilance, reach for 5, and it hates on spells going to graveyards. So something specific in the environment that, if you're worried about, maybe this would be good. I don't think there's an issue with non-creature spell recursion right now in the format. I mean, Tiggle, or not, yeah, Tiggle, Tigall, I'm not quite sure how it's pronounced, from CC18, helps you cast instant sorceries from your graveyard, and this would put a stop to that if it's around when those spells are resolving, which they wouldn't be, because they'd be at 1 or 2 mana. This wouldn't be in play, so maybe it's not so great. This card is very strong. Campfire was a card that was very similar, but it would add red instead of green. And many people argued that it was an oppressive force on the format because it made ramp just so explosive and so good. I don't know if Custard wants 1 mana ramp right now, a 1 mana dork ability. And this also gets you a card back later when you don't need the ramp, which likely makes it too strong, but would definitely have a major effect on the format. Giant Spider for 1 mana less. I don't know if this gets main decked, but it's definitely a sideboard card. Like, this is a very good rate. I kind of like this design that only untap basic lands. I would prefer this design in Custard over the other one, because then this likely means this is generally going in a mono green deck, and I'm okay with mono green decks having 1 mana ramp. I'm not as okay in there being 1 mana ramp that helps everybody without without other hoops to go through. This is an interesting hoop to me. This is a nice stompy card. An evoke spell that can kill flyers, probably not Custard playable. Find a permanent, probably not played. Great Sable Stag. When I first saw this, I was like, what? Doesn't he know that protection doesn't exist anymore? It's hexproof from, but then I realized this is a repeat, or a reprint, I'm almost certain. And since elk, I do know elk are important to this set, I guess it's fine to have another elk. But yeah, this would be in Stompy or some mid-range decks if blue-based control or black-based control becomes a problem. So that'd be a sideboard card. This is a lot of card advantage, and I think maybe the hoops in this case are... Well, I guess green can have card advantage, it's probably fine. But you get to look at the top 5 and then take any number of creatures or lands. This is rampant growth, but only for forest or plains. And you can exile it later to get some tokens. I could see this seeing play, but not being too strong. I kind of like this design. This trigger lets you find lands and put them into your hand when you put counters on her. Other ways to put counters on. Whenever you cast another creature spell, you make an elk token. I like that design. I have a similar design in Metropolis called Nano Birther, except it comes down at 1 mana, and it just makes other 0/1 nanobots whenever you cast creatures. I think this design is likely better. It's interesting because Nano Birther can go into any creature-based deck, but this, you only get the real benefit by continuing to play bigger green creatures, right? Because after 4 mana, I mean, maybe your hand is still full of creatures, you can get lots of triggers from this, but you're going to be having more mana after you cast this, and wanting to still be casting creatures. Like, this can't be the top of your curve, likely. You want it to be somewhere in the middle. Okay, maybe that's not true. But I do like how I just like this design. It gives you more elk spirits, and then once you have enough of them, you get a big bonus. The elk tribal cards, I can see how they all kind of work together, and they all help the tribe in different ways. They're all kind of stuck at 3 and 4 mana, unfortunately, which makes it hard for them to be a real tribe. A fog plus card advantage. Huh. I try and find a way to break this, but it'd probably make a really dumb, unhealthy deck. I think this goes with Glorious End, because you know the creature's going to die, but you get all this big bonus out of it first. It's likely too good, I don't know. Haste, trample, and indestructible till end of turn. I mean, you can... Well, you're giving it indestructible, but it's going to die later. So this is really if something gets blocked. You're like, alright, I'm going to put at least 4 more damage through. Make sure I kill your guy. Yeah, when I put it that way, it's probably not too good. The haste is a little weird, because you want to be doing this at instant speed when something's already attacking, probably. Arcanist Spell Surge I was thinking about. I looked at it and was like, I bet this is really good. But I dislike how it gives all your creatures prowess and then gives you the ability to like cast lots of spells. I think prowess is more interesting when it's just natively on the creature, and then you have to marry that with your instant sorcery spells. Because the interesting thing about having a strategy based around instant and sorcery spells and creatures is having to strike the balance. With this, you don't have to strike it. You don't have to have creatures with prowess. It can be any creatures, which then makes this end up feeling like more of a white card. Like any of your creatures all get +1/+1 and the ability to get even bigger this turn. So that's my thought on that. But I would see this in some kind of like Prowess Storm blue-red token deck. Just all of the blue-red instants and sorceries that give you tokens. Then you cast this, and then you have lots of cantrips and stuff. The red common in this set that gives them haste and what's it called? Trample. That would be kind of a fun deck. I like that. Despite what I just said about the design, of course. Flying Menace, 2/2 for 3. Does this see play? When it dies, you can kill something else. I should just hit it destroy instead of dealing 6 damage. But it has to have been dealt damage this turn. Seems like a very specific hoop. This is another 4-drop elk that has a weird... Each person can ramp or gain 6 life, but also evoke. Huh. This lets you hate non-basic lands, or just cards in general you don't want your opponent to have, but then they get to do the same thing to you, which is an interesting back and forth. I notice I keep saying this is interesting. That's usually when I realize there's ramifications here that you'd have to build around and really judge if it's worth the effect. This is a 4C rare. I like the 4C trigger, letting you make flying tokens when it comes out, but I don't like this design. Wants you to be putting it back on top of your library so that you can draw it again and make another token, but are you really going to be paying 7 mana a turn to make 1 bird each turn? Like, are you going to do all of that just so you can spend more mana to make something smaller than what you already had in play? I don't think so. I like this design. I don't see how it's blue, per se, but it's like Bone Splinters, except for 4, and you get a 4/4. Seems good. This card is dumb and broken. I mean, you can't just add 1 blue and triple the amount of card advantage you get from what's it called? Sign in Blood. I could see it as 3 cards, maybe. I don't know. That's just so... It's way too good, in my opinion. That's just a nutso card advantage. I think red-green must have a +1/+1 counter theme. So I'm starting to see more of the themes that I was saying I couldn't find before. Maybe part of that is because I didn't read an introduction of what the set is about, what all the mechanics are, and what sub-themes there are, which perhaps may have led to me being a bit unfair. 5 mana, 4/3 flying, but it deals 2 damage to everything without flying. Maybe a sideboard card in a weird red-white Flyers deck. This is a card that would see play. Blue-green Flash. It's been a while since I've seen Flash in Custard. I think it lost some of the enablers, but I know there's still one in Hollows. And this gives a lot of tempo, and it's tempo, not card advantage, which seems appropriate for this strategy of deck that's very tempo-based, and casting thing at the end of their turn, so it has pseudo haste for the next turn. They're not as prepared for it. I like that design. 2/2 flying lifelink for 3. Almost gets there. I kind of like this hoop of gaining a certain amount of life this turn, because it doesn't quite do it on itself unless something else you control dies, and then you can get there, and then that makes them sacrifice something. It's a fun design. I think it's designed really well, and maybe it goes in Aristocrat's deck, gives them a something big that can fly. Oh yeah. It's not an outlet on itself, which I think is good with your blood price being the outlet. You don't want your other Aristocrat style cards to also be outlets, because that diminishes the value of blood price in your set. I like this design a lot. I try and find a way to get it into an Aristocrats deck, because I think it gives Aristocrats a way to remove with and to stabilize with life gain, and the evasive game-winning card. 5 mana to put a counter on all your creatures, natively on your 2/2. I don't know if that gets there to be in a red-green deck, but it might. This makes I mean, that's going to be really hard cost to cast your Planeswalker. And kind of a tribal-specific 0, but it also has this. Wow. Okay, forget the +1 and the 0. The -1 is where it's at. You exile any permanent until it leaves the battlefield, and you gain 2 life. Wow, this would be a reason to do Abzan, for sure. Or you could just make Death Touch snakes forever. Wow. This would be a reason to make an Abzan deck in Custard. Removal. It protects itself and gives card. It protects itself 2 different ways. Yikes. I'm gonna guess it's way too strong. But it's hard to judge because we don't have very many 3-mana walkers. It's kind of a fun design. I could see this in a green-white mid-range. Something to play as a 3/2, and then when it dies, you can get something else back into your hand. Yeah, I like that card. That's kind of a fun card advantage. I don't know how it's white, but that's okay. This 4-mana instant speed reanimator. Probably too good. I talked earlier about how there's too many reanimation designs in the set. I think I must have been wrong, because I actually haven't seen that many since that first one I showed. So maybe that was an off criticism. I like this design. I complained a bit how a lot of designs you don't see how it fits with what the set is doing. There's just a lot of weird hoops that make for interesting individual cards, but it's hard to see the whole set meshing together. I think I've noticed a lot of cards that definitely work with blood price and glorious end and the fact that creatures are dying. I think black is an interesting color in this set, and I think the designer has kind of figured that out. And red-green I see is a counters theme, and then 4C is blue and white. Okay. So that Sensei's Divining Top legend from before is to help enable 4C. That's why you're putting things back on top of your deck. And this definitely does that. This would be an enabler for other 4C cards as you draw it. Huh. And you can put itself back on top. You could, right? Can't you just do that every turn? As you draw it, so you're drawing it, you reveal it, you pay 1 and a blue. And so I've revealed it. Then I draw 3 cards. So is Silent Griffin in my hand now? And then I put 2 of them back down. So you effectively get an extra card for 1 and a blue. And you can put it back on top to keep doing that every turn. You're just taxing yourself 1 and a blue to draw an extra card every turn, but with tons of card selection. Huh. So I think this is why I was thinking that, because I just finished like previewing the spoiler, and this was, there's the black-green reanimation at instant speed, and this is a green-white 1. I don't know that green does reanimation very much anymore. I think it's definitely just black or white. I think they try and keep that out of green. However, you're going to do it in green, it definitely has to be limited to this 4 or less thing. It becomes more of a value reanimation as opposed to like a swingy combo thing. Like, I can get anything I want. I can reanimate this 15-15, 15-15 big creature. This would be an interesting card to build around. Green, white, CMC 4 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Maybe it's in the Elk deck. I don't know. This is a Glorious End. Yikes. You can keep returning it. You can discard a card. I don't know why the second line is here. Discard a card. Target creature can't be blocked. Or can't block this turn. I understand the first line of text. Not so much this other one. Just as something that you can do. Probably enables some other strategies. It wants to be tapped. It wants to gain haste somehow. This is unacceptable. 2 mana hard counter spell. I think blue and a white is easier. An easier deck building requirement than 2 blue. So, I mean, this would just need to be redesigned if this were to make it into Custard, in my opinion. Oh, it's a Prismatic Amulet. Was that in constructed decks? I don't remember. Okay, it's an interesting rare. Rainbow Elk. Joyous Chromatelk. I just kind of adore the shameless obsession with elk in this set. Isn't this just a combo piece like, what's it called? That scarecrow that has some infinite combo with Millstone and something else? Not Millstone. Yeah, so this would be in some kind of infinite combo somewhere. But I don't think we have that mill effect in Custard right now. I think you want something that you mill them, and if 2 or more of the things that were milled share a color, then you repeat it. And this would make it so everything would always be that color, and so everything would always share a color. And so it would just mill forever. Probably an unsafe thing to have around. So Mind Mute is like Pithing Needle. It's probably fine to have another one in the format, can't hurt. Vanquisher's Banner will help a lot of various tribal decks. I think it's a nice inclusion. Can't complain about it. The duels are based on different tribes, and they're not necessarily races. They're also classes. So like Berserkers. I haven't seen that emphasis before. I kind of like this land. It's Graveyard Hate in a land, which maybe isn't ideal, but you sacrifice color. It's very slow. But it does kind of just shut down is Emerge, right? Like you just see what they're targeting, and then they have to choose it themselves. So it's probably too slow if someone's all in on self-mill. It doesn't feel like a mythic, but I appreciate it as a tool. Demon is the blue-black tribe, which is weird. I don't think I saw blue demons. Red-green warriors makes sense. This is, a multicolor. Elk for green-white, that makes sense. I do like these legendary lands. It's been a discussion on the Discord about what makes good legendary land design, and the conclusion was some workaround or something that made sense with what you do if you have too many of them. Like if you have one in play, it sucks to have the rest in your hand. And so these designs, you pay a bunch of mana and discard it, and you get a big effect, and they become spell lands. Lands that are also spells, I think Wizards has concluded is too strong the way that this is designed, but the fact they're legends, I don't know. Okay, so here's the reanimation. Maybe there is too much, actually. Too much reanimation. Removal. Kind of a weird effect on the blue one. Red one. I don't see how that's red. 8 mana. Exile. Oh, okay. I thought it was all of those things from graveyards, but no, it's exile artifacts, creatures, and lands from play. And in addition to that, exile all cards from graveyards. So you're exiling everything. It's Worldfire. Except you're not putting everybody at 1 life. That's crazy. It might be better if these things were more staple-ish effects, like a cycling thing, or I don't know. But I think the basic design of you have to pay a life to do it, and then there's a spell-like effect unique to the color that you can do by discarding this from your hand. I appreciate. And then spirits for blue-white, which makes sense, and some tokens. Okay, so that was Descent from the Highlands. Overall, I like the mechanics. I'd love to see them play test it out more in different designs for some of the mechanics. Like 4C, I'd like to see more exploration of that, and yeah, so my impression of this set is a lot of really interesting individual cards that make you want to brew or think about the cards individually, which I think is great. Harder to get a good idea of what the set overall is doing, but definitely interesting inclusion to the nomination process. And hopefully this video was helpful to those looking at all the sets and trying to determine what they would like to see enter Custard in the next rotation. And lots of elk. Lots of wonderful, beautiful elk. Thanks for watching.